We take the raw lead of everyday life and turn it into the cinematic gold of storytelling excellence. Experience the magic of narrative alchemy as we transform pain into power and loss into legacy. Subscribe today and witness the transformation in every new video.
On September 14th, 2024, at my daughter-in-law's 30th birthday party, in front of 22 people I had never met, my son walked over to where I was sitting, took out his wallet, counted out $300 in cash, and laid it on the table beside me like he was settling a tab he'd been meaning to close for years. My name is Eudora Mae Stratton. I am 63 years old. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. I raised my son by myself. I built something from nothing 3 times over, and I know the difference between a man who is drunk and a man who has finally decided to say out loud what he has been thinking for a long time. That night, my son was both. Before I tell you what came next, and what came next is the reason you're still here, I need you to understand who I am, not who he decided I was, not the woman his wife looked through whenever she spoke to someone else in the room, who I actually am, because they never knew. They assumed they did. They were wrong about that, the same way they were wrong about almost everything that mattered. I was born Eudora Mae Davis on July 22, 1961. In a house on Ensley Avenue in Birmingham that my grandfather built with his own hands in 1938. 3 bedrooms, shotgun style, the kind of house that holds everything, every argument, every Sunday prayer, every pot of beans that simmered low all morning and filled the whole street with the smell of something worth coming home to. My mother worked alterations at a department store downtown. My father drove a city bus for 31 years. They were not rich, but they were precise. My mother could look at a seam and tell you exactly where it would fail before it ever did. She taught me to sew before she taught me much else. How to read the grain of the fabric. How to let your hands work without your eyes needing to supervise every movement. How to make something that lasts. That lesson turned out to be about more than fabric. I married my husband in June of 1983 at New Rising Star Baptist Church. He was a good man, patient, steady, the kind of quiet that feels like safety rather than absence. We had our son on February 19, 1985, 8 pounds even, 21 inches long. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I counted his fingers twice. 10 perfect fingers. I told myself right then that I would give him everything I had, and I meant it without any reservation. The way you mean things when you are 23 years old, and the world has not yet shown you where the stress points are. My husband died on October 3, 1990, from a heart attack he never saw coming. He was 31 years old. He was at work. He did not suffer, they told me. They always say that. I was 29 years old with a 5-year-old son and $912 in our joint checking account at First Federal Savings. Account number 33814477720. I remember that number the way I remember my own birthday. Because the afternoon I sat in that bank and looked at it was the afternoon I decided it would never define me again. I got 2 jobs. Then 3 days I worked alterations at Parisian on 20th Street, pressing hems and fitting wedding gowns and replacing zippers for women who did not look at my face when they handed me their garments. Evenings I took in private sewing from my kitchen. Curtains, school uniforms, recital dresses, anything people brought to the door. Weekends I worked the register at a grocery on Bessemer Highway. $8 an hour, which was not enough and was also the only thing available on short notice when you have no time to be choosy. I kept a ledger. Blue composition notebook, the kind meant for school. Every dollar in, every dollar out, written in the careful hand my mother taught me. By October of 1997, I had saved $41,214. I know because I wrote it down. October 7th, 1997. $41,200. My son is 12 years old. He reads 2 grades ahead of his class. In March of 1998, I bought a house. 4400 block of Norwood Boulevard, Birmingham, Alabama. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, 1,100 square feet, a backyard large enough for a kitchen garden. I put $14,000 down. Financed the rest with AmSouth Bank. Loan number AM1998-4417AL. Monthly payment, $263. I still have the mortgage papers in a fireproof box on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, behind my winter hats, where they have always been. My son grew up in that house. I woke him every morning at 6, made his breakfast, walked him to school until he was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and then I stood at the end of the block and watched until he turned the corner and disappeared. He was bright. His teacher said so every year without prompting. He won an essay contest in 8th grade about Dr. King. I had the certificate framed. It hung in our hallway for 20 years. He was accepted to the University of Alabama in 2003 on a partial scholarship. I cried in the car on the way home from the post office because I had to pull over and because I did not want him to know. He had worked hard, but I had worked harder, and I needed a moment alone with that before I could share it with anyone else. I sold jewelry to cover what the scholarship did not. I took out a small personal loan for his sophomore year. I drove 4 hours each way, twice a semester, to bring him food he actually liked because the cafeteria gave him headaches, and I was not willing to let that be his obstacle. I did not once think of any of it as sacrifice. It was simply what the situation required, and I have always been a woman who responds to what situations require. He graduated in May of 2007 with a degree in finance and a job offer from a real estate development firm in Atlanta before he even crossed the stage. $54,000 a year, starting salary. I stood in that gymnasium and clapped until my palms hurt, and I did not stop even after the people around me had. He moved to Atlanta in August of that year. The first 2 years he called every Sunday, then every other Sunday, then once a month, and only when he needed something, a document, a number, a signature he couldn't locate on his own. I told myself it was distance. I told myself it was the pace of a young man building something. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be more about my own comfort than his actual behavior. He met my daughter-in-law at a company event in the spring of 2011. She had grown up in Buckhead with parents who owned commercial property and took vacations to places I had only read about in magazines. The first time he brought her home, Thanksgiving 2011, she stood in my living room and said, "This is so charming," in the tone that people use when they mean the opposite and know you know it. I made my mother's dressing, candied yams, smothered pork chops. My son had asked for that meal specifically every holiday since he was old enough to have preferences. That Thanksgiving, my daughter-in-law ate 3 bites of a salad she had brought herself and left the table early. My son said nothing. He looked at the wall behind my head while I finished eating alone. They married in October of 2013. I was not consulted about the planning. I received an invitation in the mail on thick cream stationery with gold lettering. My name was spelled correctly at least. I checked it twice before I let myself feel anything about the rest. 6 months after the wedding, my son called about an investment opportunity. He was forming a limited liability company, a small real estate investment group, him and 2 colleagues. Each partner was contributing seed capital. He had already put in $20,000. Could I help with 22? I thought about it for 3 days. I laid it all out in the blue notebook. If I gave him $22,000, I would have just under $30,000 left in savings. I was 53 years old. My hands ached some mornings. I was still working alterations. But he was my son. I agreed. But I told him I wanted formal documentation. He said yes without hesitating, which I now understand was because he believed I would never read it carefully enough to understand what it meant, and would certainly never enforce it. He did not know me as well as he thought he did. On January 9, 2014, the company was filed with the Georgia Secretary of State, Stratton Davis Realty Group, LLC, registration number 14GS77844. 3 members, my son 30%, his partner 25%, me 45%, listed as capital member with full governance rights on a majority vote. My son never mentioned the 45% to anyone. I was, as he would later put it to his partners, a silent investor, which was almost funny, given how quiet I had already learned to make myself in every room of his life. In 2016, he called again. The company was taking on a small business loan, $65,000. He needed a co-signer. His partners had already signed. Would I? I went to see my attorney before I answered. She had practiced business law in Birmingham for over 20 years, and she went through those loan documents line by line in a way that reminded me of my mother examining a difficult seam. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You understand that if they default, the liability comes to you." "I know," I said. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm his mother," I said. She closed the folder. "Then make sure you get copies of everything." I signed. Loan number CCB BL037. Copies in the fireproof box with everything else. Over the years that followed, I watched my son become someone I recognized less and less. His income climbed, 80,000 by 2017, 110 by 2020. He bought a house in Alpharetta, matching cars, a membership at a club I had never heard of, a church with a coffee bar in the lobby and a parking deck attached. He stopped pronouncing Birmingham the way we say it at home. He started saying it the way someone would who had read the name once and never lived there. I came to Atlanta twice a year, always to their house. He had not once come back to Birmingham since his grandmother's funeral in 2019. I always brought food, a pot of something, a pie, the things I had made for him his whole life. My daughter-in-law would set the dishes on the counter with a particular smile, the one that doesn't land anywhere. Later, I would find the containers in the recycling bin outside, still full, rinsed and ready to be returned, as if whatever I had brought was a formality that needed to be processed and disposed of. I stopped bringing food in 2022. Nobody said a word about it. In the summer of 2024, my son called to invite me to my daughter-in-law's 30th birthday party. September 14th, Saturday evening at their home. 20 or so guests. Nothing formal, he said. I said yes. I took the Greyhound from Birmingham to Atlanta, 4 hours and 20 minutes, because I had been saving for new tires on my car and hadn't gotten there yet. I wore a blouse I had sewn myself the week before from a pattern I loved, ivory cotton with pin-tuck detail at the collar. I spent 2 hours on it. I thought I looked nice. There were 22 people at that party. I counted, the way I always count things, because counting things has kept me solvent and sane for 4 decades. I knew exactly 2 of them, my son and my daughter-in-law. The rest were colleagues, neighbors, her parents, and the various friends that make up a life built entirely without you. I found a chair near the window, and I sat in it, and I watched the party move around me the way a river moves around a stone. My daughter-in-law laughed at the center of the room. My son circulated with the ease of someone who had decided that all of this was exactly what he had always deserved. About 2 hours in, one of his colleagues said something about self-made men, the phrase that always gets used at gatherings like this one. My son leaned against the wall with his drink and said he understood that phrase because he had grown up with nothing. Less than nothing, he said. He said his childhood had been a lesson in exactly what not to accept for yourself. Less than nothing. Those words were about me, about the house on Norwood Boulevard and the 3 jobs and the blue notebook and every seam I had ever pressed in a back room for a woman who looked past me on her way to something better. I did not speak, but he saw me listening. And something moved across his face, not shame, I know what shame looks like, something more like irritation. Like I was a detail he had overlooked in an otherwise well-managed presentation. He excused himself from the group and walked toward me. I thought for one moment that he was coming to check on me, to bring me something, to offer the small courtesy that costs nothing and means something. He stopped in front of my chair. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his wallet. He counted 3 bills. $300, and he set them on the side table next to me, not handed to me, set them there, the way you leave a gratuity on a restaurant table when you are already walking toward the door. There, he said. His voice was low, but not low enough. Several people near us had gone very still. I know you came all the way from Birmingham. I know you always need something. Let's just call that even. We don't owe each other anything after tonight. The room went the particular quiet. That happens when everyone has heard something they are deciding whether to acknowledge. I looked at the money, $300, 4 hours on a bus, 42 years. I looked up at my son. I looked at him the way you look at something you are memorizing, because you understand that this is the last time it will appear in quite this form. I see you, I said. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I left the $300 on the table. I walked through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the September night without looking behind me once. I called a car from the driveway, sat in a motel room 6 miles away with my coat still on and my hands folded in my lap. I did not cry. I am past the age where crying without a plan feels like anything other than a waste of energy. Instead, I opened my email and wrote to my attorney. I told her what had happened. I told her I was ready to move. I asked her to pull the LLC documents first thing in the morning. She responded at 7:14 the next day. I've been waiting for you to call, she wrote. Come in Monday. I took the bus home to Birmingham on Sunday. Sat at my kitchen table with the blue notebook and wrote it all out. LLC stake, 45%. Estimated company value based on last filing in current market, $420,000. My share at fair market, approximately $189,000. The number had grown since the original filing. Cosigned business loan, Citizens Community Bank, Decatur, $65,000 original. Current balance $41,200 per the most recent cosigner statement. As cosigner with documented cause, I had standing to request an immediate loan review and early repayment trigger. I stared at that for a while. Then I closed the notebook and went to bed. Monday morning, I was in my attorney's office at 9 o'clock. She laid out my options the same way she always does. Clearly, without drama, the way someone talks who respects your ability to understand a situation. Option 1. Demand a formal buyout of my 45% stake. 60 days for the other members to comply at fair market value. Option 2. File for involuntary dissolution of the LLC on grounds of member misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. What my son had done in front of witnesses met the threshold. Option 3. Contact the bank directly, as cosigner, to flag my concerns about the primary borrower and trigger a loan review. She paused. You understand this could end the company? Yes. It will damage his professional reputation. He put money on the table next to me in front of 22 people and told me we don't owe each other anything, I said. I am going to take him at his word. She nodded slowly. Then let's begin. We filed the dissolution petition on September 23, 2024. Stratton Davis Realty Group LLC, registration number 14GS778440. Grounds, material breach of fiduciary duty. Member conduct incompatible with continued operation and undisclosed misrepresentation of ownership structure to co-members. On September 25th, I notified Citizens Community Bank in writing, loan number CCB 2060BL00037. I stated as cosigner that I had lost confidence in the primary borrower's judgment and financial conduct, and requested immediate review. My son called 11 times on September 26th. I did not answer a single one. His partner called my attorney's office the following Tuesday, panicked. He had not known I held 45%. He had not known I was anything other than, as my son had described me, a silent investor. He said if he had known the actual ownership structure, things would have gone differently. I believe him. He was not the one who put money on a table beside me. The bank review triggered an early repayment clause. My son's stake in the company was frozen pending dissolution proceedings. His partners, who had built their livelihoods on the assumption that the LLC was structured as they'd been told, hired their own attorneys and came after him personally. He drove to Birmingham on October 12th. I had expected it. I left the door unlocked. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had signed the LLC documents in 2014, where I had eaten alone after he stopped calling on Sundays, where I had written out every number in every notebook for the past 4 decades. He looked worse than I had ever seen him. Thinner, 2 days of stubble. His jacket was wrinkled, which I had never once seen before. Mama, he said, you have to stop this. I poured us both coffee and sat down across from him. Why? I asked. Because you're going to destroy everything. I looked at him. What exactly did you build? I asked. Walk me through it. He opened his mouth. With my 45%, I said, before he could answer. With the $22,000 I contributed as seed capital when I was 53 years old and still working alterations. With the co-signature, I put on a $65,000 loan because I believed in you enough to make myself liable for your ambitions. That company you built, the seed it grew from was mine. You just never told anyone. Mama, you put $300 on a table next to me and told me we don't owe each other anything. I am responding to what you said. He was quiet for a long moment. I was drunk, he finally said. You were honest, I said. And there is a difference, even if it's not one you're going to like. People don't say things like that when they're drunk unless those things are already sitting there, ready, just waiting for permission to come out. You have been ashamed of me for years. Of Norwood Boulevard, of the alterations shop, of the Greyhound bus you knew I was riding to get to your wife's birthday party, while you drove a car that cost more than my house. You needed people to believe you built yourself from nothing, and I was the evidence that you didn't. His jaw tightened. He did not deny it. I'm going to lose the company, he said. I know. Raymond might come after me personally. That is between you and Raymond. What you told him about my stake is not something I'm responsible for. He put his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red. Why are you doing this? I thought about it carefully, the way I think about everything worth saying. Because my mother taught me that every seam has a stress point, I said, and that if you don't reinforce it, it fails exactly where you left it weak. You left us weak, year by year, Sunday by Sunday. You moved me to the end of every table, the edge of every room, the last to know and the first to be embarrassed by. You built a beautiful life on top of everything I gave you, and then you counted out $300 and told me we were even. So I want us to find out what even actually looks like. He left without what he came for. I watched him sit in his car in the driveway for a long time before he drove away. The dissolution was finalized on December 4, 2024. Stratton Davis Realty Group LLC, dissolved by court order. Assets liquidated. My 45% share paid at fair market value, $191,340. The bank's loan review resolved through the dissolution proceedings, and my liability as cosigner was cleared and discharged. I signed a lease on January 15, 2025. A storefront on Augusta Road in Greenville, South Carolina. 960 square feet, large front windows. Good morning light, the kind of space where you can lay 4 yards of fabric on the cutting table and still have room to move around it. Rent, $1,800 a month. I painted the sign over the door myself, Eudora's Alterations and Custom Sewing. I opened on March 1, 2025. My granddaughter, 5 years old, the only person in that household who had ever asked me to read to her without being told to. Video called me the afternoon her mother mentioned the shop online. She had found it before anyone else in the family said a word to me. "Grandma," she said, "you have a store." "I do, baby." "Can I visit?" "Anytime you want. You don't ever need an invitation." A letter arrived at the shop in early April. His handwriting, the slight rightward slant, the way his A's loop back on themselves, the same hand that wrote spelling words at my kitchen table when he was 8 years old. 4 pages, front and back. He said he had started seeing a therapist. He said the therapist had asked him to write down the things he was most ashamed of, and that this letter was the assignment. He said he understood now, not just that he had been wrong, but the specific shape of how and why. He wrote the words internalized shame, and then crossed them out and wrote them again, like he wasn't sure he had the right to use them. He said he had told his partner the truth about my ownership stake after the dissolution. He said his partner had told him he would have handled things differently if he'd known. He wrote, "I told 22 people you came from nothing. The truth is that I came from you, which means I came from 40 years of precision and patience and a love I was too proud to honor. I'm sorry. I know that word doesn't repair what I broke. I'm sending it anyway because I don't know what else I have left to offer." He enclosed a check, $1,500. On the memo line he wrote, "For the store." I sat with that letter for a long time, read it 3 times, held it in a way that was not quite forgiveness and not quite refusal, but something in between that I did not yet have the right word for. Then I endorsed the check. On the back I wrote, "For deposit only," and underneath that I wrote the account number for my granddaughter's savings account, the one I had opened the week she was born, the one that only I had ever put money into. I sealed it in an envelope and dropped it at the bank on my lunch break. I did not write back to him, not yet. Some things take longer than other things to become clear, and I have learned, from fabric from figures, from 42 years of making do, that forcing something before it is ready only weakens it. When I know what I want to say that is both honest and something worth saying, I will say it. Until then, I have a shop to open in the mornings and close in the evenings, and build into something that belongs entirely to me. I am Eudora Mae Stratton. I am 63 years old. On September 14, 2024, my son counted out $300 and laid it on a table next to me and told me we were even. I stood up, left the money where it was, walked out into the September night and showed him, slowly, legally, and with full documentation, exactly what even actually means. Not for revenge. For the girl on Ensley Avenue who learned to read a seam before she could read a clock, and who never once made anything she wasn't prepared to make last.